my name is Robert. I'm 62 years old, and if there's one thing that life has taught me, it's that silence carries more truths than many beautiful speeches. Tell me something. How is it that a father, who has given everything he had, time, sweat, love, is able to be rejected by his own daughter on the most important day of her life? Not with shouting, not with anger, but with coldness. Coldness that cuts more than knife. Maybe you're out there trying to understand how something like this can happen. Perhaps deep down you have already felt this kind of pain, of giving everything and still being left aside. Because there are things that we do for love, and only finds out how much they cost when love turns into indifference. Today I'm going to tell you what happened the day I went to my daughter's wedding, the one I paid to the last penny, and heard from her, "Dad, you're not invited. Go away." But this is not a story of revenge. It's a story about what happens when love is misunderstood as an obligation, and about what a father does when he discovers that he has become just a name in the supplier contract. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know something. There was an instant, a single instant, when everything stopped. The sound of the hall, the laughter, even the music. A glass of champagne slipped out of someone's hand, bursting onto the marble floor as if announcing what was to come. And in the middle of that golden scenery, full of expensive flowers and guests in ties, my daughter looked at me with a dread that was not of fear. It was of shame. Shame on me, the father who paid for every penny of that show. But make no mistake, I didn't react with screams. I just turned around and drove away. Now, if you're here listening to this, it's because some part of you understands this pain. And if you understand, then stay. If you can, leave a like on this video, subscribe, not out of obligation, but out of empathy, because today I'm going to open a wound that has been kept silent for too long. And if you've ever felt the bitter taste of ingratitude, maybe this story is a little yours too. In the months leading up to the wedding, my life revolved around every detail of that party. And look, I was never a party man. I always preferred a barbecue in the backyard, an unhurried conversation, a game on the radio. But for her, by Emily, I even learned how to deal with video conferencing application. They taught me the beautiful names: mood board, boho chic concept, flour imported from Alaska, and that farm-to-table catering, which I only understood when I saw that the food came from expensive farms and even more expensive restaurants. She spoke and I took notes. And even without understanding half of it, I said, "Sure, daughter. If it's important to you, it's important to me." Each week, she sent me more quotes. And I sent the transfers like someone who plants a tree hoping that one day it will give shade. The dress was the part that marked me the most. She sent the photo all excited with a link to a store in Los Angeles. It cost the equivalent of 2 months of my old salary, when I was still working on the construction site with the sun cracking on my back and calluses on my hands. But I looked at that dress and thought, she deserves to shine. I remember the call in which she thanked me today. But it wasn't a, "Thank you, Dad, you're amazing." It was a, "Confirmed, payment was approved, dress arrived." And soon after, she changed the subject. It was always like this. The calls were getting shorter, colder. It was all about spreadsheets, deadlines, suppliers, never about me, never about how I was. I still tried to stay present. I suggested taking my cousin Donna to the wedding, the same one who took care of her when she had measles, the same one who braided Emily's hair to go to school. And she replied, "Dad, it is a more important event. Exclusive." The word crossed me like a knife. Exclusive. And what was I? Part of the old furniture that no longer matches the new sofa? That day I hung up the phone more slowly. I stared at the device for a while, as if it was going to explain to me what I had done wrong. But there was no explanation, and I followed. I continued to send the payments, confirm the contracts, write down the dates. But something in me was no longer whole. And here I pause, because maybe you've been through it too. When the silence of the one you love begins to speak louder than any words. When you realize that you were not forgotten all at once, but little by little, in installments of contempt. If this feeling touches you in any way, comment below. He writes something simple such as, "Touched me," or "I've lived it," just so I know that I'm not talking to myself in this world that screams so much and listens so little. Returning. A week before the wedding, she called me to confirm the last adjustments. He said that the number of guests had passed a little, so he would have to rearrange the tables. "No big deal, Dad, just an aesthetic issue," was what she said. But I already knew. Deep down he knew. She wanted to hide me, to put myself in a corner, away from the cameras, away from the important. Even so, I continued. I sent money to the last penny. I made sure not to delay anything, and I bought a new suit. Lie. It was used, but it was impeccable. Dark blue, just the way she liked it. When I tried it, I looked in the mirror and smiled. "You're still whole, Robert," I said to myself. But something told me that that smile wasn't going to last long, because there was something wrong, something I couldn't name, but I felt it in my skin, and it was this feeling that accompanied me until the wedding day, like a whisper in the depths of my soul, warning me that the worst was yet to come. You know that feeling that you go to a place with joy but you take a feeling with you? That's how I got into that hall, and that's how I saw with my own eyes what no parent should see. But this, I will tell you about this in the next part, because there are things that we can only say after taking a deep breath, and I still haven't breathed. 3 days before the wedding, I received an email from the event coordinator. Subject: final adjustments in reception. I thought it was something about the menu, or maybe the times of the ceremony, but when I opened it, I saw that it was something more direct and colder. Dear Mr. Robert Clark, we inform you that the reception seating has been rearranged to better accommodate the bride and groom's direct guests. If you have any questions, please contact our team. I didn't understand. Or rather, I didn't want to understand. Rearranged? Direct guests? How so? I called Emily. She answered with that hurried voice as if she were doing 1,000 things at once. Dad, relax. It's just a matter of space. The logistics of the salon have changed. You'll still be there, of course, but some tables had to be relocated, that's all. I tried to believe it, I swear I tried, but her words rang hollow as if they were rehearsed. I know my daughter. I know the tone of polite lies. On the same day, I met George at the market. An old friend, one of those who were by my side when Emily was still walking around in a braid and a pink backpack. He looked at me a little suspiciously and blurted out, "Aren't you going to the rehearsal dinner?" I thought it was just for the close family. He laughs embarrassedly as if pretending he knew. But that sentence kept gnawing at me inside. Close family. What was I then? The man who paid for everything but who is not good for the photo. I returned home that day and sat in the armchair in the living room, the same one where I fell asleep so many times after work while she studied on my lap. I found myself looking at the ceiling and remembering the invitation, that golden envelope, full of bows and thin letters. My name was there, of course, but only the name. No photo of me, no mention of what I represented in this story. It was the most expensive invitation I had ever received, and the emptiest too. The discomfort began to turn into a lump in the throat. But I didn't say anything. Not for her, not for anyone. Because I'm the kind who swallows pain, who waits until the end to see if things go back to their place. But you know, there is silence that is not patience. It's fear of accepting that the truth is there, knocking on the door, and we still haven't had the courage to open it. I wanted to believe that she was just busy, nervous about the big day, that everything would make sense later. But every new detail that came up pushed me one step out of the scene. First, the rehearsal dinner. Then, the photos with the groom's family on Instagram, without even a mention of me. The coordinator called me to confirm the arrival time and said that my name was on the side list. I asked what that meant. She stuttered. He said it was a technical term, but my heart knew. Side list is where they put who can be dismissed without making noise. At that time, even the smell of my house seemed to change. The same house where she grew up, where she fell off the swing and I ran like crazy to the emergency room, where we spent Christmases alone, just me and her because the rest of the family lived far away, where she cried for the first love disappointment, and I made hot chocolate and said that everything would pass. That same house now looked cold, as if she too was telling me, "You're no longer apart." But I remained silent. Pride or cowardice, I don't know. Maybe I still hoped that, at the altar, she would look at me and say, "Thank you, Dad. None of this would be possible without you." That was what I wanted, is that it? A recognition, a spark of gratitude. But what I received, it was something else. And when I tell you what happened on the wedding day, you will understand why that hope was buried for good. Because there are words that don't come back. And there are gestures that we never forget. Are you ready to know what she said to me when she saw me at the door of the salon? Because to this day, I still hear that phrase as a whisper that won't let me sleep. The wedding day dawned cloudy, the kind of sky that doesn't rain, but doesn't smile either. I put on my suit carefully. I ran my hand through my thinning hair, put on the shiny shoes from the night before, and looked in the mirror one last time. He was ready. In the passenger seat, I put the gift box. Inside, Emily's grandfather's pocket watch. It was old, but restored by a watchmaker in Portland. Every detail polished with the affection that only one has for those we truly love. It was more than a gift. It was heritage, history, time, a symbol of everything I carried inside my chest. I drove slowly to the Seattle Grand Ballroom, a chic place, one of those that look like a magazine set. I saw imported cars at the door, women in dresses that cost more than I earned in an entire month during years of work. But I wasn't intimidated. After all, those who built houses with their own hands do not bow down to expensive chandeliers. I walked with the box in my arms, slowly, feeling my heart beat in the rhythm of hope. It was her day, and despite everything, I wanted to see her happy. That's when the security guard approached. Young, tall, with that radio strapped to his waist and a list in his hands. "Good afternoon, sir. Name, please?" I smiled, adjusted my suit. "Robert Clark, father of the bride." He skimmed the list, returned, then he looked at me with a hard expression. "Your name is not on the main list, sir. Unfortunately, I can't let him in." I felt a stab in my chest, as if the air had hidden. "It must be a mistake," I said. "My daughter, it's her wedding. Before I could finish the sentence, I saw Emily coming towards me. The white dress fluttered, the veil already fastened, and for a moment I thought she was going to smile. For an instant, everything inside me was filled with light, but she stopped 2 steps away from me, the expressionless face. "Dad, I asked you not to come." Those words came so slowly, but they hit so hard. I stood still. I didn't understand. Or maybe he understood but didn't want to accept it. She continued, "This here is a moment of my new family, and you don't fit in." It was as if someone had ripped me off the ground. I looked her right in the eyes, waiting for a tear, a regret, anything. But I only saw ice, coldness that I didn't even know a human being could have. It was then that Michael appeared, in a suit lined up, hair slicked back, serious expression. "Mr. Clark, this is a private event. I think you—" He didn't understand. I held the box tighter. His hands trembled, but I didn't say anything. Not a word. My eyes burned, but I didn't let a tear fall. I turned slowly. I took a few steps, and then I heard, inside, the applause starting. There, at the door of that hall full of people that I paid to be there, I was expelled, rejected as if he were a stranger, an intruder. I walked to the car without looking back. I went in, closed the door, and stood there, motionless, listening to the heavy breathing, trying to understand what had just happened. But it didn't take long, because when I got home and opened my mailbox, a brown envelope was waiting for me, and inside it, a receipt that would change everything. Do you have any idea what was written on that paper? Because it was at that moment that my pain turned into something else, something much stronger, something that none of them expected. I left the parking lot slowly, as if I didn't know if I'm leaving or just running away. The gift box was still there in the passenger seat, intact, heavy, not for the clock inside it, but for what it represented: time, history, an inheritance that now had no one else to be delivered. I drove aimlessly for about 15 minutes until I parked my old truck in front of the coffee shop where I usually go on Sundays. The Evergreen Brew, on the corner of 5th and Monroe, right in downtown Tacoma. Simple place, a smell of strong coffee and apple cake. I walked in as if my feet knew the way on their own. I sat at the same table as always, in the corner of the window. The waitress saw me and smiled, but soon noticed something on my face. "Black coffee, Mr. Clark?" I just nodded. The ambient music was low, but not enough to drown out what was playing inside me. A short time later, the young attendant who knew me by sight arrived with the cup in his hands and asked without malice, just out of politeness, "What about marriage, Mr. Clark? It was today, right?" I looked at him with a short, tired smile, and he said, "It was, but they changed the script." He didn't understand. Of course not, but I understood. At that time, each sip of coffee seemed to pull a little of the sadness that was stuck in my chest. I didn't cry. I didn't hit the table. I didn't make a scene. I just stood there silently, trying to understand how a lifetime of sacrifice could end outside a closed door. On the way out, I left the tip on top of the bill and held the box more carefully than before. The clock was still there. He still marked the hours. The world had not stopped. Only mine. I went back to the truck, but instead of going straight home, I stopped at the pier of the old town. It was where I took Emily when she was little, to see the boats and eat popcorn out of a bag. That place always smelled of Sunday. I sat on the wooden bench, the breeze lapping my face. And there, looking at the seagulls soaring in the gray sky, I thought of everything. In every extra hour I did to pay for her college. Each night she slept badly when she had a fever. In every birthday note I wrote with my hands dirty with cement. And now I was the father who was not on the list. You know, I'm here opening my heart, telling my story. And if you're listening there, if it's touching you in any way, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. Not because I need a number, but because there is still a lot of stuff stored in here. Something that maybe, who knows, help someone who has already felt forgotten, outside the party of their own life. I stayed there for a long time. The clock inside the box read 17:07. Exact time when, years ago, I cut Emily's navel cord in the maternity ward. 17th in the morning on a Tuesday in September. The nurse looked at me and said, "She's a beautiful girl." I cried that day. But today I only felt empty. I returned home slowly. When I arrived, I found that manila envelope in the mailbox. It was from the buffet. Inside, a detailed receipt. Meals for 170 guests, premium drinks, bartender service, additional fee for urgency. A total of $18,630. Payment, Mr. Robert Clark. Everything paid days before as she requested. I sat at the kitchen table with the receipt open, and it stared at me like a mirror. I was not a father. It was a sponsor, funder, patron of a show where they didn't even give me a chair. It was at that moment that a spark ignited. It wasn't hate. It was another kind of feeling. Colder, calmer, but more dangerous. A feeling that begins with a simple question. What if she doesn't know who I really am? Because until then, she only knew the father who says yes. But I was about to show her a side that I may never have known. Do you want to know what I did after that? Because at that moment, in that silence, I decided on something that completely changed the course of this story. And there is no turning back. That night, after leaving the receipt on the kitchen table as if it were a sentence, I went to the basement closet and grabbed the old leather briefcase, the same one that accompanied me for so many years in the works, full of house plans, scribbled contracts, and bitten pens. Now she kept another kind of story. Folder by folder, note by note, I began to reconstruct the trail of my daughter's marriage. Every penny invested, every detail chosen without consulting me, everything was there, with my signature at the bottom. The first note was from a place called Everbloom Floral Studio in Bellevue. $7,000 in floral arrangements. Rare roses from Colombia, black orchids from Thailand, seasonal peonies from Utah. I didn't even know the name of these flowers. I only knew that I was the one who paid for them. Then, Italian wines from the 2005 vintage, $380 per bottle. Personalized linen napkins with the initials of the bride and groom in gold, ordered at a boutique in San Francisco. Invitations with handmade wax seal and textured paper imported from France. Every line, every detail, a wound. But that's not what revolted me. What really dismantled me was seeing the most recent card bill. It was still active and being used. The party was already over. I had already been chased away from my own investment. But the expenses continued. I saw it. A last-minute upgrade in the sound. $2,800. A surprise performance by an indie band from California. $9,000. Do you know who signed? Nobody. Because the card was mine. And my daughter, who had already emotionally discarded me, now also used my name as someone who takes another cutlery from the drawer. Without asking. Without looking back. I closed the folder slowly. I put my hands on her and took a deep breath, not anger, but something more difficult to explain. An emptiness that only those who have trusted too much can understand. Because it's one thing for you to be rejected. Another is to be used to the last thread of utility, and then discarded as if it were a construction box. One of those that only serve as long as they have cement inside. I sat on the couch and stood there staring at nothing. Every penny of that party was a day of my life. An extra shift, a weekend that I exchanged rest for delivery, and she didn't even think to ask me if I could, if I wanted to, if everything was fine. At that moment, I began to remember a specific day. Emily must have been about 9 years old. I came home exhausted, with my hands full of calluses, and my knees stiff from so much cement. She was waiting for me at the door with a glass of lemonade made by herself, all proud. "You deserve it, Dad. You work too much." I kept this gesture on my chest for decades, and now, what did she think I deserved? To stay outside the party I funded? Pay for a show I didn't even hear? It was at that time that I looked again at the buffet envelope and, next to it, I placed the other invoices. The sum was obscene, not in dollars, but in contempt. The equation was clear. I gave everything, and I received a go-away in return. But there, in that silent room, an idea came to me. Simple, direct. No shouting, no scandal. I wasn't going to charge in the scream. I was going to charge accurately. Because if my daughter turned me into a card number, I would show her the real weight of the name she used. Now tell me, do you think that a person who acts like this deserves to inherit something? Because the next thing I did involved a lawyer. It is a document that changed everything. That night, after reviewing the invoices as if reading his own certificate of forgetfulness, I slowly climbed to the attic. It was there that I kept the cardboard boxes that no one touches anymore. The time boxes, as I usually call them. Dusty, heavy, full of things that only make sense to those who lived it. I took the lid off the first one, and there it was. Emily's baby album. The cover was faded pink with a teddy bear design in the corner. I opened it and soon saw the first photo of her at 3 days old, wrapped in a white blanket, her eyes closed, as if she already knew that the world outside was too noisy. I turned page by page. She was 3 years old, making a snowman in Portland. Me on my knees next to me, helping to put the buttons on the doll's coat. Another photo of her at 9, sitting on my shoulders at a Mariners game. I remember the day like it was yesterday. She screaming for her favorite player and me just looking up, thinking it was what was worth it in life. That laughter, that moment. The memories attacked me like an icy wind. In each photo I saw an effort, a sacrifice, a renunciation that was never told. The 15th birthday she wanted with a New York theme. The time I had to sell my Harley, my road companion, to pay for her internship in London. She looked at me with that twinkle in her eyes and said, "Dad, it's a unique opportunity." And I believed it, as I always believed. No, sometimes we think we're building a bridge, and only later does he realize that it was a one-way walkway. Everything went to her. Nothing came back. I stood there with the album on my lap and the frame of the Harvard diploma hanging on the wall of the living room staring at me. I made that frame, you know, with leftover wood from the last work I touched before I retired. I sanded, varnished, fitted with already hard hands. When I handed it to her, she said, "Wow, Dad, do you still do these things?" As if it were a favor, as if he didn't understand that there was affection there, not a job. And that's when I need to tell you something. If you've made it this far, don't stop now. Because what happened next? No one expected it. Neither did she. Me neither. I took a specific photo. The two of us at my sister's ranch in Spokane. She must have been about 11 years old. I was lying in the hammock eating apples, and I was sitting on the floor telling stories about my childhood. At that time, she still wanted to hear it. He still looked me in the eyes. He still called me my hero. But it seems that somewhere along the way, someone erased this part of the story for her. He threw it away. I closed the album carefully, like someone closing a letter that will no longer be sent. I put everything back in the box. But before I closed the lid, I added something new. The last wedding bill. I put it there as if to say to myself, this is also part of her story, whether I like it or not. Do you know what? That night was not one of crying. It was a decision. Because when the memory hurts more than comforts, it is a sign that the time has come to turn the key. And that's what I did. The next day, I put on a clean shirt, put on my leather shoes, and called Margaret Bennett, a trusted attorney who specializes in asset revaluation. Because it's one thing to give for love. It's another to let love serve as an excuse for abuse. But before I even set foot in her office, I was still going to get a message that, look, I swear to God, it made me rethink everything. Because sometimes those who hurt also bleed. Do you have any idea what she sent me that morning? Because there began a new part of this story, and there is no going back. The next morning, after spending the night with my head boiling and my heart in a silence that seemed to scream, I sat on the edge of the bed with the phone in my hand. My eyes were dry, but inside me there was no more room to swallow feeling. I looked at nothing and only thought about one thing. How far does the contempt of those we raised with love go? It was then that I dialed the number of the First Bank of Tacoma. The attendant answered with that automatic voice of someone who still doesn't know what lies ahead. "Good morning, sir. What can I help with?" I took a deep breath and said, "I want to block all future payments linked to the account that paid for my daughter's wedding. Everyone. Now." She stuttered. "Sir, I'm sorry, but the event is today. The launches are scheduled for this afternoon." And I replied firmly without raising my voice. "Exactly for that. Cancel everything. Immediately." There was silence on the other side. It was not a technical doubt. It was a surprise, because I think she expected to hear a resigned, tired, defeated father. But what she heard was a man waking up from an emotional coma, a man who understood, too late, that love cannot be a one-way street. After the bank, I called the caterer. It was a Seattle number. He attended a woman named Karen. I said my name, mentioned the reservation. She responded in the cheerful tone of someone who thinks she will hear compliments. But I was direct. "Cancel everything. The food, the delivery, the service." She said, "But sir, the guests are already," and I cut it off. "Let them eat what they have on their plate. Whatever is extra, whatever is to come, will no longer come with my money." Turned off. I called the flower shop, then to the decorator, then to the DJ, one by one. My name was on all the work orders, my signature, my card, my trust. But now, my decision. There was no scandal, no swearing, no tears, only firm orders, given with the authority of someone who has spent his whole life saying yes and for the first time, understood the power of a no. You know, sometimes too much love makes us forget that we are also people, which also has a limit, which also bleeds. We get used to giving in so much that we start to think we don't have the right to say enough. If you've ever felt that, if you've reached that point where silence has become an internal scream, comment below. He writes, "I understand you," or "It's true," just so I know that I'm not alone in this feeling that no one sees but that lives inside us like a hidden scar. I ended the calls with the kitchen clock at 9:12 a.m., the same time when, years ago, I signed the first contract of my contractor. The difference is that on that day, I started building houses, and now, I was beginning to rebuild myself. I stood still for a few minutes looking at the cell phone on the table. It didn't vibrate. No link. No message from Emily. Not even a "Father, why?" Not even a "Let's talk." Silence. A silence that confirmed everything. But just when I thought the day would end like this, my phone rang. It was a number I knew very well. And the voice on the other side, that voice, I confess, made me tremble inside, because she wouldn't care for nothing. And what she had to say, it would change everything. Can you imagine who it was? And what did this person reveal to me? Because the next call was not just a warning. It was the missing piece of the puzzle of truth. The call I received that morning shook me more than any bank charges or cold response from Emily. But that's not what made me leave home aimlessly. It was something more difficult to explain. An emptiness. A silence that not even words of anger could fill. I took the key to the truck, put the coat on my shoulders, and went without a certain destination, as someone looking for an answer that knows it may not exist. And before I knew it, it was parked in front of the old church on 6th Avenue, where Sarah and I got married. She no longer receives regular masses, almost everything there is memory, but the side door was still open for anyone who wanted to enter in silence. Entered. The smell was the same. Old wood, extinguished candles, and dust laden with history. I sat in the last pew as I did at funerals when I didn't want to be noticed. The sun came in through a cracked window and drew lines of light on the empty altar. I closed my eyes, and I spoke to her, with Sarah, in a low voice as if he did not expect an answer but needed to vent anyway. "Forgive me, love. I couldn't raise the daughter you deserved." The sentence tore me apart, because it wasn't just guilt, it was impotence. I gave everything, but what she became, it was not what we dreamed of together. I stayed there for a time that I don't know how to measure, just feeling the icy bench, listening to the faint sound of the wind hitting the stained glass windows, until someone approached. An old priest who walked slowly. He didn't say anything, he just sat next to me. Two men of wounded faith, two strangers united by a silence that dispensed consolation. I didn't know him. He didn't ask me anything. But in that mute company I felt less weight, because there are times when all we need is to be seen, not cured, just seen. There, on that wooden bench, I realized something that hurt me more than all the wedding bills, more than the closed door of the hall, more than the "go away" from my daughter's mouth. I realized that what I lost was not money, it was recognition, because at the end of the day it's not about applause, it's about looking into the eyes of those we created and seeing a glow of gratitude. And I know what you did for me, and I never got that from her. You know, there is a kind of loneliness that only those who have loved too much know. And in that moment, I felt like a father without a function, like a man who built a castle and was expelled even before stepping on the carpet at the entrance. I stayed there until the sun started to set. The priest stood up first. He touched my shoulder lightly, and he left. I followed soon after. On the way back, I went over every detail, every step that led me to that point, every yes I gave when I should have questioned, every request I fulfilled without thinking about myself. But I didn't imagine that when I got home that night there would be a letter waiting for me, a letter written with words that, well, I never thought I'd read from Emily. Do you want to know what she wrote? Because the content of that letter, he completely changed the course of this story. And maybe, just maybe, it showed that all was not lost. The next morning, even before the sun touched the windowsill, I was already up, not for insomnia, but for clarity. I slept a few hours, it's true, but I woke up with a more whole spirit than in the last few months altogether. I walked to the bathroom mirror and stared at this gray-haired man with sunken eyes and a firm chin. I shaved calmly, as I did on important days. I put on my favorite navy blue flannel shirt, the same one I wore the day I took Emily to see the snow for the first time. I wanted to remember who I was before contempt tried to rewrite me. I sat at the table with a strong coffee and a notebook. In it, I started to write everything: dates, amounts, sacrifices, loans, cards used in her name, tuition, the financing of the college car, the $9,800 I paid in cash for the exchange in London, the $140,000 for the wedding. Each item was a silent testimony of what is done for love. But now, that love called for organization. He asked for registration. I picked up the phone and called my accountant, Franklin, a meticulous man who has known me for decades. I spoke slowly. Frank, I need to get all the documents that prove the investments I made in my daughter's life. Every penny. Without haste, but without forgetting anything. He didn't ask why. He only replied, "You can leave it to me, Robert. Are you okay?" I paused for a second, then said, "I'm staying." Then I dialed the number of Margaret Bennett, a firm and sensible lawyer with whom I had worked out my retirement papers years ago. She answered and recognized my voice immediately. "Robert, how long? What can I do for you?" I took a deep breath. I need to document everything I did for my daughter. I need to make the invisible visible. She was silent for a few seconds. Then he asked, with the calm of someone who knows wounds that do not bleed out, "Do you want to charge or teach?" The question hovered for a moment, but the answer was already in me since dawn. I said firmly, "I want her to learn, because charging would be easy. Teaching, no, but that's what I wanted, for her to understand, not for her to fear me, that she would look in the mirror and see what she did to those who only tried to love her, that she knew one day, even if in silence, how much it cost what she undid with a sentence." Margaret listened to me until the end. Then he said, "Robert, what you're doing is rare. It is strong, but it's fair." And in that moment, for the first time since marriage, I felt that someone saw me not as a bitter old man, but as a man in reconstruction. If this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, will it help me to carry it forward? Like and subscribe here to the channel. It makes more difference than you think, because there are people out there living the same pain in silence, thinking that it is weakness to feel. After the call with Margaret, I spent the rest of the day sorting receipts, printing old statements, calling suppliers. I also asked my sister Donna to send me copies of the transfers she made to Emily herself when she went through a financial crisis in her sophomore year of college. Money I returned to my sister with interest, just to keep her daughter out of trouble. In the evening, when the house fell silent and the papers were arranged on the table like dominoes lined up, I closed my eyes for a moment. I didn't feel a victory. I didn't feel revenge. I felt only purpose. But what I didn't expect was that, in the middle of this whole process, new information would come to me. And this information, it didn't come from the bank, nor from the lawyer. It came from someone who was there at the wedding. Someone who saw and heard something I should never have discovered. Can you imagine what else could have happened behind that party? Because this revelation was like turning the key to a door that I didn't even know existed. And on the other side was the naked truth, and she wasn't pretty. I spent that day as someone digging an ancient piece of land looking for forgotten bones. Cardboard boxes piled up in the office, digital files that I didn't even remember the password anymore, and that old black folder with crooked handwritten labels: college, travel, Emily, education, Emily, health. Each roll I pulled brought along a piece of my story, or rather the story I built with calloused hands so that she would have the chance to live a different one. I started with the college statements. 4 years at Harvard. I enrolled her there as someone who gives up her own future, but without thinking twice. Because at the time she said with shining eyes, "Dad, it's my dream." And me? I wanted to be the soil where this dream could grow. But there, with the paper in hand, I read it with different eyes. Each semester costing almost $50,000. Imported books, the bedroom, the health plan. I wrote everything down in a simple spreadsheet, one of those Excel spreadsheets, as if I were recording not only values but scars. Education, $410,000. Transportation, $78,000. Housing, $132,000. Marriage, $146,000. The total, $766,000. And I haven't even finished adding up the details yet. When I got to the exchange receipts in London, I remembered the Harley I sold to complete the values. A Harley-Davidson Heritage that was my favorite since my youth. The buyer asked me, "Are you sure you want to sell?" And I said, "I have a daughter with a dream, buddy. It's priceless." Today I think maybe I did. At that time, I stopped for a moment. I looked at that spreadsheet. So many numbers, so many years, a lifetime. And I asked myself, what was the one thing I never got in return? A thank you. Yes, that's what hurt the most. Because I'm not talking about luxury. I'm not talking about wanting public recognition. I'm talking about a simple, "I know what you did for me, Dad." A phrase that fits in a note, in a whisper, in a look. But that, coming from her, never arrived. No, sometimes, we give so much that the other person thinks it's an obligation, as if his sacrifice were part of the furniture, invisible, always there. And I think there are a lot of people who are listening to this now and know what I'm talking about. That's why I tell you, stay with me until the end of this story. Because the most memorable moment, it's yet to come. I continued digging, now with a different pain in my chest. It wasn't anger, it was a fact. As someone who sees for the first time the size of his own mistake, to love without teaching limits, giving everything without ever showing the weight of what has been given. And it was at that time, in the middle of spreadsheets and receipts, that I found something curious, an old email from about 5 years ago. It had in the title, "Revision of the Will, Patrimonial Distribution." I vaguely remembered sending it to Emily, asking for her opinion on a draft I was preparing. I wanted to make everything right in case something happened to me. In the message I asked, "Do you think this is fair? Do you want to review something?" She never responded. Not even a father I received it. Not even a "I'll look later." Nothing. That there, for me, was symbolic. Me trying to share. She, ignoring it. I closed the notebook. The afternoon light was already beginning to gild the room, and I was there, alone, surrounded by proofs of love that no one wanted to keep. But then, the phone rang, and the name that appeared on the screen was that of someone who was at the wedding, someone who saw what I didn't see, someone who overheard a conversation, one of those that wasn't supposed to come to me. Can you imagine what was said behind my back, at that party that I paid for every last napkin? Because the truth, I was about to break down the door of my memory, and there was no way to ignore what I was about to hear. 3 days after the wedding, I was on the back porch sanding a piece of wood for a bookshelf that I started and never finished. It was my way of thinking without thinking, you know? The busy hands help to organize what the head cannot handle. When my cell phone vibrated in my shirt pocket, I didn't give it much importance, but he vibrated again and again. Messages, notifications, missed calls. I picked up the device, and the first thing I saw was Emily's name stamped on a Facebook post. My father ruined the happiest day of my life. Underneath, a long caption. He said that I showed up uninvited, that I caused confusion, that I disturbed the guests and was rude to the groom. He used words like invasive, uncontrolled, unsafe. For a moment I stood still. I looked again, thinking it was some misunderstanding. But no, it was herself, my daughter, the girl I carried on my shoulders, the one I rocked when I cried because of the first days in kindergarten. I sat on the chair on the balcony, cell phone in hand, as if holding a note of betrayal written in a public square. The publication already had more than 4,000 likes, hundreds of comments, some calling me a toxic father, others sending support to her. And what really cut me off was a local Seattle blog that reproduced the story, with the headline, "Bride is humiliated by her own father at the altar." The article used her version without checking anything. On top of that, a local influencer, one of those who live on controversy, commented, "Another case of an abusive father disguised as a provider. Money can't buy love." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, because there I was, painted as a villain. And you see, I am a man who learned from an early age to swallow injustice. As a young man, I was accused of stealing tools on a construction site because I was the only Latino on the team. I kept silent. When Sarah died, they said I was going to end up leaving my daughter because men can't stand raising alone. I kept silent. But now, being called abusive, for having paid for the entire wedding and still being kicked out the door, I went to the supermarket in the late afternoon. And there I realized the real effect of those words. A woman who had known me for years looked away in the canned goods aisle. A neighbor with whom I had always exchanged pleasantries crossed the street when he saw me at the checkout. Emily's words didn't kill me, but they threw my name into a bottomless pit. And look, there's one thing we learn with age. The truth doesn't need an audience. But when the lie spreads, sometimes you have to raise your head and let the silence speak loudly. But at the right time, I sat down that night with a strong coffee and reread every sentence of her post. And there, with my chest still burning, I remembered a phrase that Sarah used to say when Emily was little and stomped her foot wanting something. When the truth comes, it will hit without hitting. No, some memories are like that. They appear when we least expect them, and they carry a force that crosses the years. If you have any memory that never left you, something that still visits you today, good or bad, share with me here in the comments. Sometimes dividing a piece of the soul helps to sew what life has torn. That morning I spoke to Margaret again. I sent the screenshots. I asked bluntly, "Does this constitute defamation?" She replied, "Yes, and there's more. We can use that to your advantage." And that's when everything starts to change. Because what Emily didn't know is that not everything is erased with likes. And the name she tried to dirty, it was the same name that sustained every wall of her life. Can you imagine what happens when the truth has documents, witnesses? Is it the right time to show up? Because what I was about to do was not revenge. It was justice with the same dignity that I used to raise that girl. And that part, no one will be able to erase it. The next morning, with the world still boiling on social media and my name circling like a vicious virus, I decided it was time to stop shutting up. But look, I didn't do it out of anger. I did it out of dignity, because there is a time when silence, if it lasts too long, becomes complicity with lies. I sat quietly in my makeshift office, the old dining table that now served as a trench, and drafted a document. It was not an open letter, nor an inflammatory outburst. It was a simple, objective, well-founded statement. I began, "My name is Robert Clark. I'm 62 years old. I am the father of Emily Clark, and yes, I was the main responsible for the full financing of her marriage. I'm not perfect, but I'm not the monster that's being painted." I attached all the receipts to the statement, spreadsheets organized with dates, values, and purposes, official bank documents, the contracts signed with the suppliers, copies of emails, even photos of Emily in moments paid for by me, summer camp at age 10, graduation in Boston, the new car with the red sash she posted years ago thanking her, the good life that Daddy gave. I sent everything to Margaret. She reviewed it, corrected minor legal points, and said, "It's ready, it is strong, and it's clean." That afternoon, we sent the statement to 4 local newspapers. Only one responded immediately, the Spokane Business Journal. 2 days later, there was the headline, "Silent Businessman Exposes Ignored Sacrifices," the other version of the story that went viral. The article was respectful. It showed both sides. He published excerpts of my statement, images from the spreadsheets, and highlighted something that moved me more than any likes or likes. Robert Clark is known in Tacoma for his work as a contractor and his dedication to his only daughter after the death of his wife. For 3 decades, he built, renovated, and delivered houses. Now he is just trying to rebuild his reputation. The text had repercussions. The next day, I received calls that left me with a lump in my throat. George, my childhood friend who hadn't spoken to me since marriage, called me. "Bob, I'm sorry, I was unfair. We only saw what was in the window without asking what was in stock." Donna Evelyn, the neighborhood florist, passed by my house with an arrangement and a note. "For those who planted so much and reaped silence, let flowers come." And the Rotary Club, where I volunteered for nearly 10 years, issued a public statement of support. praising my firm but honorable stance in the face of a disproportionate smear campaign. I'm not going to lie. I cried, but it wasn't a cry of sadness. It was a relief of someone who was for the first time not seen as the father who failed, but as the man who endured it. Emily, of course, was silent. But on the networks, the comments began to change tone. People who used to clap for her publication now asked, "But why would he have paid for everything then?" Others said, "This story is not matching, and what was once certainty has become doubt." I did not seek lynching. I just wanted balance. That whoever looked at me in the supermarket did not turn their faces. May my name, after all I have done, not be spat out as if it were a curse. And at that time, I understood something important. The truth does not scream. She waits. But when it arrives, it enters without having to knock. The small town has big ears, and in a place like Tacoma, silent justice travels faster than parlor gossip. But look, not everything was resolved. Because Emily, he did not react. Not even an apology. Not a retraction. And what did she do next? It was the final blow. A desperate attempt to protect himself. Can you imagine what she tried to do with the will I had written years before? Because this time, she went too far. And it touched on a place that I kept with great care. The one I left written for when I'm no longer here. The letter was sent on a cold morning. One of those that remind us that time passes for everyone, even for wounds. Margaret wrote everything clearly. A formal, polite notification without aggressiveness but without room for doubt. It gave Emily 30 days to respond, acknowledging or contesting the values that, until then, had only been in the field of memory. From that moment on, what was a family conversation became a document. What was love in silence became justice with protocol. It wasn't easy for me. No father dreams of having to write a letter like this to his daughter. But sometimes, when the heart gets too beaten, it needs the support of reason to keep beating. 2 days after delivery, my phone rang. It was her. Answered. "Dad, what is this? Are you threatening me now?" Her voice was a mixture of anger and despair. I took a deep breath. "No, Emily. I'm treating you like an adult, and adults take the consequences of what they choose." She screamed. He said he was going to expose everything. Who was going to say that I was trying to sabotage the marriage? That he was going to sue for emotional harassment? I was silent for a moment. Then I spoke with the calm of someone who no longer carries expectations. "You've already done that, daughter. He has already told the version he wanted. Now it's my turn to tell the truth, and this time, with signed paper." She hung up. Hours later, she learned from acquaintances that Michael, the husband, had gone to the office of his father, a famous lawyer in San Francisco, for guidance. His family, traditional and zealous with reputation, began to pressure him. They wanted to know why their name was involved in a public scandal, because they had not been informed of the origin of the money used in the marriage. Michael, who until then seemed to support Emily with all conviction, began to retreat. And that's when I realized something curious. When the lie is sustained only by shouting, the first silence already begins to dismantle everything. Emily tried to call 2 more times. Blocked, not out of contempt, but out of necessity. I made it clear in the last message I sent. A father's love does not end, but what existed between us is now on another level. You are no longer a child, and I'm no longer ground for you to step on without looking. She visualized. He did not answer. From that moment on, I understood that I was no longer the father of the girl who climbed on my shoulders to reach the Christmas tree. I was the man she chose as the antagonist of her own vanity. But look, even with all this, I did not wish her harm. I just wanted her to see. And sometimes the only way someone can understand the value of something, that's when you start losing. Time went on, and she, who thought she had everyone around, began to realize that not everyone swallows easy versions. But do you believe there was still more to come? Because a simple white envelope, forgotten at the bottom of a drawer of Sarah, my late wife, appeared in Aunt Donna's hands. And what was inside? Everything changed. Literally everything. The following weeks were a strange echo of everything that came before. The noise she made at first, with the posts and accusations, became a whisper. The likes disappeared, the comments of support evaporated, and what was left was the emptiness of the people who saw the truth come, slowly but surely. Because lies can run the whole block, but the truth, she arrives walking, and when she arrives, no one moves her anymore. The Spokane Business Journal story went all over Seattle, and the press that had previously ignored me began to retract it, even without admitting the mistake. Some sites took the stories down, others published short notes. Clark case update. New information shows different version of the relationship between father and daughter. That sentence alone was enough for me, but she was the one who felt the real weight of it all. Emily. The friends began to move away, discreetly. Nobody wants to be on the side of those who use their own parents as stairs and then kick the steps. Her social circle, which was once a bell jar of applause and glasses of sparkling wine, gradually cracked, and Michael became a stranger in his own house. His family, people with a heavy surname and values of appearances, could not stand the exposure. His father, a renowned lawyer, sent a formal letter to the couple. I learned about it from an acquaintance in Rotary who worked in the same office. The letter cited concealment of financial fragility, public misconduct and misuse of family image in a media scandal. Translating, they wanted distance from the confusion. And more, they asked for the marriage to be annulled. Michael's mother sent Emily a direct message. You embarrassed us. We no longer recognize the woman he chose. When I heard about this, I felt no joy. No, because seeing one's own daughter being rejected is a pain that gives no one pleasure. Even though I knew she dug her own hole, part of me still wanted to throw a rope. Until one night, the phone rang. And this time, I answered. The voice on the other end was choked, broken. Father. I closed my eyes for a moment, took a deep breath. Hi, Emily. Dad. They are all against me. Michael doesn't talk to me. His family wants to annul the marriage. My friends are gone. I don't know what to do. Are you happy now? There was silence, and in that silence there was the weight of everything. I stared out the window while she waited for an answer. Outside, the wind shook the trees, and the clock struck almost midnight. Emily, I said slowly, you still don't understand. It's not about revenge. It's about responsibility. Life charges, and it's not the way we want. It's the way we deserve. She was crying, and I let her cry, because sometimes crying is the first step of lucidity. There was no anger in me, just a strange, almost sad calm, like someone who sees the glass castle he built collapsing before his own eyes. There are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. Like this video and sign up, and let's make this story reach those who need it. We spent a few seconds without saying anything, and before hanging up, she muttered, I wish Mommy was here. I closed my eyes and a tear escaped without me being able to contain it. She's there, Emily, but you need to deserve her silence. The line was muted, and I knew that that conversation was not a new beginning, nor an end. It was just the break. But fate sometimes likes to test one's firmness. And the next day, an envelope arrived without a sender, with a name in the corner that chilled me inside. Sarah L. Clark Testament, original document. Do you have any idea what I found inside? Because what Sarah left written, it was not just a testament, it was a letter to me, and for Emily. And what she said, it would change everything I thought about forgiveness. The envelope was old, yellowed by time, with Sarah's handwriting on the front. That firm, beautiful teacher's trait I would recognize with my eyes closed. I opened it carefully, and inside I found two things, a formal, typewritten will and a handwritten letter. In the will, nothing surprising. The house, the savings, some savings left to Emily, with a clause that caught my attention. Release upon proven maturity and financial independence. I had never noticed this passage before, but the letter was something else. Robert, if you're ever reading this, it's because our little girl has grown up. Maybe too much, maybe to the wrong side. But remember, love is not permissive. It is firm. It's the ground and also the limit. And if she forgets the value of things, it's up to you to teach her, even if it hurts. Teaching sometimes is an act of love disguised as harshness. I closed my eyes, and I swear for a moment I felt like Sarah was right there, next to me, telling me, you're doing the right thing. That envelope arrived as if it were the final seal of what I already knew deep in my chest, that father's love is not only about protecting, it is also about dropping to learn how to get up. And that's exactly what happened. Days later, things started to come crashing down for good on Emily's side. Michael's family broke the lease on the house where they were living, officially, for image reasons. Michael packed his bags without saying a word. He left her alone in the hotel room that was still being paid for with his corporate card. When the manager showed up at the door to warn that the payment had not been confirmed, she was floored. He tried to call Michael. No response. She tried to call her mother-in-law. It fell into the mailbox. And for the first time in her life, she looked around and there was no one to save. The suppliers started calling, caterer, photographer, decorator, all charging. And the phrase was repeated one after the other like a cruel echo. Look for your father. She tried to sell the rings, the dress, the engagement ring, but nothing covered the hole she dug herself. I knew everything from the whispers of the city, from the messages that came to me. Tacoma is small, and bad news moves quickly. I'm not going to lie to you. Part of me hurt, because as much as she had hurt me, I still saw in her the girl who came running to my lap with her knee scraped. But there is a pain that no longer fits in the lap, you know? The one that the person himself needs to carry to understand the weight of what he did. And it's hard, you know? It's hard to see the glass castle crumble, but it's also the only way to see who really knows how to rebuild. You know, sometimes life needs to break our pride to teach the value of humility. And if you're listening to this now, you might know what I'm talking about. That moment when fate takes away all the canes to force you to walk alone. But stay with me until the end, because what comes now is the point where everything really changes. The part where the silence I kept for months turns into something that neither she nor anyone else could predict. Emily, for the first time, had to look for a job. It was rejected everywhere. The surname that used to open doors now caused discomfort. The name Clark has become synonymous with scandal. One afternoon, as I was sweeping the yard, I saw a car pull up across the street. It was her. He left slowly, hair tied up, looking tired. She didn't come to the gate, she stood there just watching. And at that moment I realized that maybe finally Sarah was right. That sometimes love needs to let the other feel cold to understand the value of shelter. But what did she say when she finally crossed that gate? It was something I'll never forget. Because it wasn't an apology. It was something much deeper. Something that turned the page of our history in a way that even I didn't expect. That Sunday, the sun came through the kitchen window in a calm, almost respectful way. I was sitting at the table, drinking my black coffee and listening to an old Miles Davis vinyl. The sound of the trumpet seemed to talk to me, soft but purposeful. It had been a long time since I felt that peace. It wasn't happiness, you know? It was quiet, a kind of silence that no longer hurts, it only accompanies. The outside world was still talking about my story. The newspaper article continued to have repercussions, and on social networks I received messages from people I didn't even know. Fathers, mothers, grandparents. People saying, "You did what I never had the courage to do." Others said, "Thank you for reminding me that to love is also to teach." And I answered some when I could, because I realized that my pain had become something bigger, a kind of mirror where others saw their own forgotten limits. But I didn't take pleasure in any of it. No revenge, no pride, just a gentle certainty. Sometimes, to teach, we need to lose. And I had lost a lot. It was then that the phone vibrated. I looked at the screen and saw her name, Emily. I took a deep breath before answering, but I didn't need to. It was a message. Short. "Dad, I need help." I stared at those 4 words for long seconds. It was not a speech, nor a request for forgiveness. It was a written whisper, an echo of humility, perhaps the first. I took my cell phone, went to the office, and opened the bank's app. I made a simple transfer, $800. Enough for her to breathe, but not to depend again. And along with the transaction, I wrote a message. "Daughter, this money is not a solution. It's a start, but it comes with 3 conditions. 1, you need to get a job in 2 weeks. 2, don't ask me for money for 6 months. 3, call me once a week, just to talk. No excuses, no demands, just talk." Sent. I wondered how she reacted when she read that. Maybe he cried, maybe he rebelled, maybe he understood. I don't know. But there was the first lesson that money can't buy, the value of effort. After that, I went to the backyard and sat in the rocking chair. The wind was lightly blowing against the trees, and for a moment I remembered Sarah. I felt that she would be proud, because what I did was not an act of harshness, but of faith. Faith that, even late, repentance can become learning. And, you know, there is a time in life when we understand that forgiveness is not forgetting what they did to us. Just stop carrying the weight of what doesn't change. It was on that day that I decided to open a new notebook. I wrote on the first page, "Things I learned after 60." And the first sentence was, Love needs a limit to continue being love. But fate, it seems, does not like quiet endings. Because that same week, a different envelope arrived in the mail. It wasn't Emily's, nor Margaret's. It was from the Seattle registry office, and when I opened it, the name that appeared on the header made me stop breathing for a few seconds. Can you imagine who came to me? Because what was written in that document, it was going to put father and daughter face to face in a way that neither of them expected. The envelope from the registry office arrived on a rainy morning. The postman handed me a hurried good morning, without imagining the weight of what he was carrying in his hands. I sat down at the table, the coffee still steaming, and opened it calmly. Inside, a document with the letterhead of the Seattle Family Court, and on the masthead 2 names, Robert Clark and Emily Clark. It was a call for a conciliation hearing. She had filed a formal request for mediation. It was not for money, nor for the dispute over goods. It was for dialogue. For a moment I left the paper on the table and stared out the window, trying to understand what it meant. Maybe, after all, my daughter was trying to learn to talk to me without screaming. 2 weeks later, the hearing was scheduled. On the day, she entered the room with her downcast gaze, her hair tied up, and a simplicity that I had never seen in her. She wore a gray sweater, without makeup. Nothing of the woman who one day paraded in a $20,000 dress in a Golden Hall. The mediator, a kind gentleman, began by explaining that the goal was to reestablish communication. I was silent. So did she. Until the man said, "Mr. Clark, Mrs. Emily wants to say something." She took a deep breath. "Dad, I know I hurt you. I know I was unfair. And I know that you don't owe me anything else. But I needed to look into your eyes to say, thank you." The sound of that word that had never come before seemed impossible. And there, in the middle of a courtroom, without an audience, without cameras, without masks, she gave me what money would never buy: regret. I didn't respond immediately. I just closed my eyes and let the air in. The mediator noticed and ended the session early, saying that silence is also a form of agreement. And it was true, because that silence, it weighed more than any speech. A few months passed. Life has returned to her rhythm. And it was through mutual friends that I learned that Emily had moved to Spokane Valley, about 4 hours from Tacoma. I also learned that she had gotten a job, not in a fancy office nor in an advertising agency, but as a receptionist in a dental office. One day, unintentionally, I saw a photo that she posted herself, in a simple uniform, hair up, the badge hanging from her chest with the name, Emily L. Clark, front desk assistant. The smile was restrained but true. There was something new in that look. Something I hadn't seen since she was a child. Sincerity. I was told that she arrived early, served coffee to colleagues, and served each customer with a good morning that seemed to be an apology. One of these customers, an elderly lady, told her colleague that one day when she was served, she looked at Emily and said, "You remind me of my granddaughter, but mine still hasn't learned to ask for forgiveness." And Emily, instead of being offended, smiled and replied, "Maybe she's still learning. So am I." When I heard this, my chest tightened in my heart, but not from pain. It was something different, a mixture of pride and relief, like someone who sees the bud of the flower he planted years ago finally opening, late but alive. Each week, she fulfilled the conditions I had imposed. I called every Friday night, sometimes to tell about the work, other times to talk about the difficulties. He never asked for money again. Once he said that he had paid the rent in advance. In another, that he managed to buy a used blender for his new house. I just listened, without giving advice, because now she was discovering on her own what I had always tried to teach. And it was at this stage that I realized something simple but powerful. Silence educates more than screaming, because when we stop screaming to be heard, the other needs to learn to listen, and she was finally listening. You know, life has a curious way of teaching. Sometimes punishment is just the absence of comfort. And that's what saved Emily. She understood that the world she lived in was rented with my sweat, and that only her work could build a real floor. And I know that many people who listen to me now carry a similar wound, of an ungrateful son, of someone who got lost, of a love that he did not know how to thank. But stay here with me, because what's next? It's what I call the return of the hug. Because yes, after everything, after so many walls erected, there came a day, only one, when she crossed the gate of my house again. And what happened there? It was something that not even time had the courage to erase. That afternoon, the sun set slowly over the yard, tinging the leaves dancing in the wind golden. I was sitting in the same chair where I spent so many years waiting for news, waiting for redemptions, waiting for time to heal what love could not handle. But that day there was no waiting. There was peace. Emily had returned days before, not to ask, not to justify, but to be. He entered the gate with short steps, his hands trembling, his eyes clean. I brought a simple cake and a bottle of coffee. He sat on the porch, looked at me and said, "Dad, can I just stay here for a while?" I smiled, and that smile was enough. No word of forgiveness, no explanation. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't come in a sentence. It comes in presence. We stood there in silence, listening to the wind and the distant noise of a church ringing the bells of 6. It was there, without speech, without tears, that I felt that everything settled down. She learned to live, and I learned to let go. Michael followed his life, returned to California, and we never heard from him again. His family, who cared so much about appearance, disappeared like smoke. And as for me, I follow here. I gardened the yard, repaired the neighbor's gate, went back to attending worship on Sundays. I take with me the certainty that I did not lose a daughter. I returned her to her own life, to one's own responsibility. And that, in the end, is love with a backbone. The other day I opened my notebook and wrote a letter that I never intend to send. "Daughter, I gave you the world thinking it was protecting you, but what you lacked was learning to fall. Today you fell, and I hope he knows how to get up." I ended with the same line I said at her graduation so many years ago. "I'll be around, but never again underneath." I folded the paper and put it in the drawer, along with everything that reminds me of who I was, and who I learned to be. Because the great lesson of all this is simple but profound. Love without limit creates dependence, and love with limit teaches freedom. Life is generous with those who understand that forgiveness is not erasing the past, it is looking at it without anger. And today I look. No pain, no fear, no pride, only with gratitude. Because sometimes you have to lose your ground to discover that the mirror also reflects strength. If you have come this far with me, thank you. Really, it is good to share this journey with those who feel together, with those who understand that growing up is not always beautiful, but it is always worth it. If this story touched you, give me a hug in the form of a like. It warms up more than you think. And if you want to come back for another coffee and another story, subscribe here to the channel. Tell me in the comments which city you're listening to me now, so I know how far this conversation has gone. And it activates the bell, so you don't lose it when the coffee is ironed again. Because life goes on, and each new story is a new chance to start over. Don't go away yet. Listen to the next real story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.